A young woman vanished just 2 days before her birthday under mysterious circumstances. From the very first hour of the investigation, police uncovered a series of suspicious clues that suggested something terrible might have happened to her. Despite these alarming signs, the investigation dragged on for more than a decade, and it wasn't until 12 years later that the shocking truth finally came to light. The outcome left the entire country outraged, as no one expected anything like this. Katelyn Markham was born on August 16, 1989, in Fairfield, Ohio. She grew up in a loving family with her parents and younger sister and was surrounded by many friends. Even as a child, Katelyn had a gift for making connections. She could approach the shyest kids on the playground and have them laughing and playing with her in no time. Katelyn was also a creative soul who loved singing, drawing, and basically anything related to art. Her passion shaped her career path, and after high school, she enrolled in a local university to study graphic design. The summer of 2011 was supposed to be a turning point in Katelyn's life. She was preparing for her final exams and planning a big move to Colorado with her fiancé, John. The couple had been together for 6 years and got engaged the year before. They dreamed of starting their life together in a new city and were looking forward to getting married after the move. On the morning of August 14th, Katelyn was supposed to go to her shift at the bridal shop where she worked part-time. That day, her loved ones tried reaching out to her, but she didn't respond to any calls or messages. Soon, her family began to worry and contacted Katelyn's workplace, only to find out that she hadn't shown up for her shift that morning. This was highly unusual. Katelyn was always in touch and had never missed work without letting someone know. Still, her family initially thought she might be busy with someone else and couldn't get back to them. They decided to wait it out, but as evening approached and there was still no word from Katelyn, their concern grew to a breaking point. Her fiancé John decided to stop by her apartment after work to check if everything was okay. Katelyn's car was parked in front of the small apartment complex where she lived. But when John entered the apartment, which was unlocked, he only found her dog inside. There was no sign of Katelyn, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary to suggest that something bad had happened. Despite this, the fact that she hadn't been in touch all day was deeply concerning to everyone who knew her. So John decided to call the police. He explained that his fiancée hadn't been in contact since the morning, and they sent a patrol officer. After searching Katelyn's apartment, the officer found no signs of a break-in, struggle, or anything to indicate a crime. But one particular thing did stand out as suspicious. Katelyn's keys were inside, along with her wallet and ID. Given that she wasn't at home, this raised red flags for the officer. If Katelyn had left on her own, she would have at least taken her keys and locked the door behind her. John said that he last saw Katelyn the night before. They had been hanging out at her place with a mutual friend. After his friend left, John headed to a party with some other friends, while Katelyn decided to stay home because it was already late. A few hours later, John returned to his own home, where he lived with his mom. He and Katelyn exchanged a few messages, but after that, she stopped replying. John mentioned that he texted her every morning and always got a response. Except this time. Investigators spoke with Kaylee's friends and family, but none of them had been in contact with her since the previous evening. Everyone insisted that Katelyn wouldn't have just taken off without a word. It was completely out of character for her. She was focused on her final exams, and her birthday was only a few days away, which she planned to celebrate at a local restaurant with her loved ones. With all this information in hand, the police began to suspect that something bad might have happened to Katelyn and decided to launch a search operation. They brought in over 100 volunteers, divided them into groups, and started combing through the city. Her family and friends also prepared flyers with information about Katelyn, which were soon posted on nearly every street. Meanwhile, detectives were looking for any leads that they could find. Naturally, they started by investigating Katelyn's fiancé, John. On the first day, the police noticed some small scratches on his neck, but John explained that he had accidentally scratched himself while shaving. They also asked him to take a voice stress test, which basically analyzes recorded answers for any signs of deception. The results were inconclusive, but the detectives couldn't determine if they indicated that John was lying or simply anxious about his fiancée's disappearance. From the start, he was actively involved in the search efforts, answered all the police's questions, and even gave multiple interviews to local news outlets, which had already begun covering the case. The investigators then verified John's alibi, confirming that he was indeed at a party with friends that night. They were also able to corroborate his account of returning home afterward and watching a movie on his laptop by reviewing the data on his computer. Detectives spoke with the mutual friend who had visited Katelyn and John that evening, and he confirmed that he was indeed at her place. He mentioned that they talked about the couple's upcoming move, Katelyn's exams, and just chatted. However, he did note that Katelyn seemed quieter than usual, spending most of the evening studying on her laptop. He assumed she was simply stressed about the upcoming exams, which were only a few weeks away. Based on this information, the likelihood of John's involvement seemed slim, and investigators shifted their focus to other leads. After obtaining a warrant to track Katelyn's phone, they discovered that it had been turned off at 12:06 a.m., and there had been no activity since. They also saw that she had sent John a photo about half an hour earlier, which aligned with his account. Despite their efforts, no further traces of Katelyn were found, so the police doubled down on the search. In the days that followed, even more volunteers joined the effort, and national media began covering her disappearance. Search teams scoured forests, bodies of water, and abandoned buildings, but nothing yielded any results. Weeks went by, and despite the ongoing search, the police found no trace of Katelyn. John continued to be heavily involved in the search efforts, but as time passed, more and more people in the town started to suspect that he might have had something to do with his fiancée's disappearance. Eventually, these rumors reached John himself, and he addressed the accusations, stating that all he wants is to bring Katelyn home, and that he didn't have time to focus on such allegations. The investigators also made it clear that they had no solid reasons to suspect John. His alibi checked out. He had allowed them to search his home without a warrant, and consistently cooperated with the police on every request, doing everything they'd asked. Still, John admitted that the accusations sometimes frustrated him. Once, while putting up flyers on the street, a woman approached him and started talking about the case. She mentioned that most people thought the boyfriend was probably the one who did it, without realizing she was actually talking to him. The search for Katelyn continued for several months, but eventually the investigators had to call it off. Despite their efforts, they hadn't found a single clue, so the police decided to focus on the investigation and follow up on any new leads. By that time, Katelyn's case had gained national attention, and the detectives had received hundreds of tips. They thoroughly looked into each one, but none brought them any closer to finding the missing young woman. The authorities also kept increasing the reward for information, which reached $50,000 within the first few months. The case remained cold for almost a year, until a rather unexpected twist. Police in Miami arrested a 28-year-old man for assaulting a college student. At first, this seemed unrelated, until detectives working on Katelyn's case discovered that this man had been living right across the street from her apartment complex at the time of her disappearance. Detectives went to Miami to question him and establish his whereabouts on the night Katelyn vanished. But after a thorough investigation, they concluded that he had no opportunity to commit the crime, and he was ruled out as a suspect. This case remained cold for another year, until April 10, 2013. On that day, a man from a small town called Cedar Lake in Indiana went searching for scrap metal along a road near a wooded area. As he walked past some trees, he noticed a bundle of black tarp. He decided to inspect it and, to his horror, discovered human bones inside. He immediately called the police, and the officer sent the remains to a lab for analysis. During the search of that area, they also found another bag, which contained only a skull. The experts quickly determined that the remains were indeed human and, using dental records, identified the victim. It was Katelyn. This confirmed that Katelyn had been dead all along, and the police were now certain they were dealing with a murder, as someone had dismembered her body and transported it to a neighboring state. The killer hadn't even attempted to bury the remains. They had simply been left next to a pile of trash. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the forensic experts were unable to uncover any significant clues or determine the exact cause of death. The only notable finding was evidence of a stab wound on one of the arm bones. Although the exact cause of death could not be established, the medical examiners confirmed that it was undoubtedly a homicide. The fact that the remains were discovered in another state complicated the investigation. Police from both Indiana and Ohio had to work together, but despite their combined efforts, they made little progress. They did, however, conclude that the body was likely kept elsewhere before being moved to the woods. It's possible the killer feared it would be discovered and decided to relocate the remains to a more remote spot. In 2015, Katelyn's father decided to hire a private investigator because he felt that the local police department was not putting enough effort into solving the case. The investigator conducted his own investigation, speaking with Katelyn's relatives and friends, and eventually identified 2 potential suspects. He passed this information on to the police, but they chose not to disclose the detective's findings. That same year, the reward for information increased to $75,000, yet this still did not bring investigators any closer to solving the mystery. Katelyn's father fought to have this case transferred from the local police to the county authorities, and by the end of 2015, he finally succeeded. A new team of detectives took over and began working on the case basically from scratch. In 2016, detectives told reporters that they had a prime suspect whom they believed to be responsible for the murder, but they lacked any evidence to make an arrest. Because of this, they did not reveal the suspect's identity, and the investigation stalled once again for years. In 2018, police in a town just a few miles from Katelyn's home discovered the body of another young woman. The circumstances of this crime bore a striking resemblance to Katelyn's case, prompting investigators to explore a possible connection. They soon identified a suspect named Michael, who had reportedly stalked the victim for weeks before killing her. Detectives began to investigate any potential links between Michael and Katelyn, and initially they found none. But soon, they stumbled upon a surprising detail. In one of the killer's social media photos from a music festival, he was seen standing next to Katelyn's fiancé, John. When police questioned John about this, he confirmed that he had met Michael at the festival, but stated that they had barely interacted. Despite the intriguing coincidence, investigators couldn't uncover any further connection between Michael and Katelyn, making it impossible to link him to her murder. This continued until 2023, when investigators unexpectedly announced the first arrest in Katelyn's case. Police took a man named Jonathan into custody. They informed the media that Jonathan was a close friend of both Katelyn and her fiancé. At first, the police kept the details of the arrest under wraps, but 2 months later, they made another shocking move. Katelyn's fiancé John was arrested on suspicion of her murder. Only after this did investigators share with the public what they had uncovered in the past few years. When the case was handed over to the county police, the new detectives started from scratch, going through all the existing evidence. Right away, they found John's behavior suspicious, especially his 911 call. The investigators felt his words sounded rehearsed, almost like he was reading from a script. They got the same vibe from his initial statements to the patrol officer. Next, the detectives looked at recordings of conversations with mutual friends of Katelyn and John. Many of these friends had shared some concerning observations back in 2011. According to their accounts, in the months leading up to her disappearance, Katelyn expressed that there were serious issues in her relationship with John. So serious that she even considered breaking up with him. She told her friends that John had started using drugs, became more aggressive, and was constantly watching adult content of a quite disturbing nature. Another interesting aspect of the case came from witness statements that had been in the police's possession since 2011. On the night Katelyn disappeared, 2 teenagers snuck out for a party around 2 a.m. As they passed John's mother's house, they noticed 2 cars pull up with their headlights off. John got out from one of the cars, went inside the house, and quickly returned before getting behind the wheel. Both cars then drove away, still not turning the lights on. These statements contradicted John's alibi, who claimed he had been home watching a movie. But investigators found out that his alibi relied on open tabs on his laptop related to that movie, but there were no concrete proofs confirming he was actually at home watching it. So, it turned out John didn't really have any solid alibi. On the contrary, 2 witnesses had seen him that night under very suspicious circumstances. But that wasn't all. It turned out that on the night Katelyn disappeared, John's phone had been turned off just 2 minutes before Katelyn's and remained inactive for 15 hours. John also deleted several messages he had sent to his fiancée that evening, leaving their content a mystery. Initially, he claimed that Katelyn hadn't responded to his good morning message, but it was later revealed that he never sent such a message at all. Another interesting detail was neighbors' reports about hearing some noise from Katelyn's apartment that night. According to their initial statement, they heard arguing, banging, and then someone quietly repeating the word, "No." John, on the other hand, insisted there was no argument between them, and the original team of investigators, for some reason, didn't find this odd at all. After reviewing all this information, the detectives concluded that John had been the only serious suspect from the start, but they needed more evidence. They re-interviewed Katelyn's friends, which led to a surprising discovery. One female friend revealed that just a few months after Katelyn's disappearance, John confessed he had romantic feelings for her. This revelation shocked her, especially since John had still been participating in the search efforts for his missing fiancée and expressing how much he missed Katelyn. The detectives also re-interviewed all the witnesses and eventually obtained a search warrant for John's mother's house, where he had been living at the time of the murder. There, they discovered a black tarp identical to the one that had covered Katelyn's remains. In his room, the police found several disturbing poems handwritten by John. One poem contained a troubling inner dialogue. "Deep down, I love her. You have to kill her. But I love her. She has to die." The detectives also discovered that John had been quite aggressive toward his new wife. By that time, he had a family and children, and the police found video footage showing him yelling at his wife while holding their young daughter. Finally, the detectives determined that the location where Katelyn's remains were found was all along the route to John's father's farm, a place he visited frequently. This fact confirmed his familiarity with the area. Putting all this information together, the detectives decided to confront John, but he denied any involvement in the murder. When they pointed out all the suspicious details and inconsistencies, he calmly responded that they were merely circumstantial. Unfortunately for investigators, he was right. They understood that with this limited evidence, they were unlikely to secure a conviction, as there was no solid proof linking him to the crime. However, they could arrest him for providing false statements based on witness accounts that placed him leaving his house at 2 a.m. But there was another complication. Witnesses reported that John wasn't alone. Another car had pulled up with him. Following this lead, detectives focused on his friend Jonathan, suspecting he might be the other person. They soon discovered that Jonathan was also in that group photo from the music festival, alongside John and a convicted murderer who had killed another young woman. Reviewing Jonathan's conversations with the police in light of their findings, the detectives decided to arrest him for providing false statements, although they didn't disclose specific details at the time. 2 months later, they arrested John himself, but the case still hung by a thread due to the lack of substantial evidence. The detectives seemed to hope that Jonathan would give them a confession. At that point, they believed someone had helped the fiancé dispose of the body, and it seemed his friend was involved. But both men continued to deny any connection to the murder, and John posted a $1 million bond, securing his release until the trial. Given all this, the investigators took a desperate step. Realizing that a jury trial would likely lead to John's acquittal, they decided to offer him a deal. The prosecution agreed to reduce the charge of third-degree murder in exchange for a confession, and John accepted the offer. In June 2024, he appeared before a judge and pleaded guilty, but refused to share any details of the incident, as it wasn't required under the terms of the deal. In the end, the judge sentenced him to the maximum possible term for that charge, which in Ohio was only 3 years. This verdict understandably outraged the entire country, but the judge had no power to change it. Had John not accepted the plea deal, he could have easily avoided even that sentence, as there was simply no evidence for first-degree murder charges. As for his friend Jonathan, all charges against him were dropped for the same reasons. It seemed the detectives were unable to find any evidence that he had assisted in disposing of the body. After the sentencing, Katelyn's father expressed that the biggest concern was not knowing the full truth behind his daughter's murder, rather than the actual prison sentence. He admitted that he initially doubted John's guilt, but had gradually shifted toward believing it over the years. He recalled how John had stayed in touch with him and even hugged him at Katelyn's funeral, despite being the one responsible for her death. Shortly after John was placed in prison, his cellmate contacted the police and claimed that John had told him some details about the murder. According to the inmate, there had been an argument between them that night, and John had lost control. He attacked Katelyn and strangled her, then panicked and even thought about calling the police. He also considered staging the scene to make it look like Katelyn had done it herself, but ultimately decided to dispose of her body instead. But the detectives were hesitant to believe this account. They assumed that John might have told this story because it actually aligned with the existing evidence, but whether he was telling the truth was still an open question. The police believe that the murder could have been premeditated rather than an impulsive act of rage. One detective who interrogated John was convinced that the man was a psychopath. He stated that he had spoken to many criminals throughout his career, but John stood out among all of them. Despite all this, there was no way to change the sentence, and John would be released in 2027 when he turned 39. The victim's parents had given up hope of ever learning the full truth. Even if John decided to confess, they would likely struggle to believe him. They were left to watch as he served a minimal sentence behind bars and would eventually return to society, where his actions could potentially harm others. The police are also continuing to investigate a possible connection between John, his friend, and the man convicted of killing another woman. They do not rule out the possibility that the trio could have bonded over their twisted fantasies and shared tendencies toward violence, but there is no evidence to support this theory yet. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.